This study was developed by a guy named Eric Berne back in the 60s, and I'll spare all the details. You can read all about it. He developed a system of thinking, of analyzing communication. It's a way to analyze communication. That's really it. There are some Bible verses that say some kind of things like this, but in general, this is not a biblical theory. I would not ever teach this if this were against Jesus or against a Christian worldview. This is a very neutral, morally neutral thing. And this is one of the most helpful psychological theories I ever learned in counseling in a master's degree. And so I've taught it ever since then. So that's been, I don't know how long, how many years, almost 2 decades, I guess, I've been teaching this and using it all the time. I use it in my life every day. I use it in counseling. And so again, though some people disagree, which is fine, my view is that there are certain things the Bible don't talk about, like how to fix my carburetor, how to clean my teeth, black holes and quasars. There's all kinds of things the Bible just has nothing to say about it. And if my carburetor breaks, I go to a mechanic. Well, psychologists, regardless of their moral or religious background, analyze how humans behave and how we use our psyche, and I think we can learn things from it. We do not at all have to buy into their worldview, like a Sigmund Freud, who believed that religion is just a neurosis, it's wishful thinking, it's God on the skies, you got father or mother figure issues. Well, that's nonsense. So my point is, there are a lot of times I dismiss that, I don't find it compelling. This is a secular theory, you might say, but I consider it neutral, and I find it very helpful. So instead of taking some Bible verses and rip them way out of context, what I just cannot do, I would go berserk. And I teach others not to do it as well. I'm not going to do that. So I'm just being upfront. This is from Eric Berne. Eric Berne. Anyway, and then he taught several people, and he would have the students over to his house. They would hang out. He would tell these long stories and develop this theory over time. I don't buy all of it. I don't concur with all of it. So what I've done is I've read a lot about it, did a lot of studies on it and so forth. And I took what I think are the most, almost commonsensically recognizable patterns that the average person goes, oh yeah, I can see that and I can use that. But so what I'm saying is, this is not all of the theory. This is a big bulk of the basic understanding of TA. And he had several students, like Dr. Claude Steiner at the very top of the page 1. You'll see Claude Steiner, he has a pamphlet that has the big overview, and I've adapted that pamphlet and turned it into this. So this is a condensed form of a condensed form. And again, instead of doing a research paper, I just did a good job there. So that's it. Transactional analysis is what it's called. Eric Berne is the founder. It analyzes communication, and this is in a simplified summary. It is not from the Bible per se, but I think it's useful. There's my little preface. Any questions or comments about that? Anything, it's open. You're free to ask me whatever you want. Okay, so there are 2 major ways to use transactional analysis. I will typically call it TA for short, transactional analysis. TA, okay? By the way, it's kind of like, like I see some people say Kansas City, they say I call it KC. I've learned that about you people. So I go to KC, I've learned, what in the world? Oh, Kansas City. And you don't say Kansas City, you say Can City. I go to Can City, not Kansas City, but Can City. I'm learning all kinds of things. I've learned that bags are called sacks, not bags. They're called sacks at the grocery store. So I've learned all kinds of stuff. Transactional analysis, or TA, is used in 2 major ways that I use in my life and in counseling. One is analyzing communication between me and another human, and internal communication, internal dialogue. And I'm going to go back and forth on these 2 things throughout, and hopefully you'll see how helpful they are. Okay, at the very top of page 1, this is the nuts and bolts, and I will address parent, adult, child forever in this study, so get used to this one here. When people interact, they do so in an ego state. Now, I'm not going to unpack that too much. This is from Freud. But think of an ego state as a specific way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Think of like an ego state almost like a conscious state. It's a particular specific way, a pattern of thinking, feeling, or behaving. And each ego state has its origin in specific regions of the brain. They can behave from a parent ego state, child ego state, or adult ego state. The parent state is the taught concept of light. The adult is the thought concept. Child is the felt. So if you look on the right side, that picture there, parent ego state. Behaviors, thoughts, and feelings copied from parents or parent figures. I want that to sink in. Whenever we're operating from a parent ego state, it's just the way it sounds. It means we are behaving or thinking or talking like a parental figure did in our past. It might not have been your parent, but a parental figure. It might have been an uncle or grandma, grandpa that raised you, but a dominant figure in your life was parental. Typically, it's a mom or father, mother or father. And those are things we say, think, or do that we learn from our childhood. The adult ego state, behaviors, thoughts, and feelings, which are direct responses to the here and now. Think of that as collecting data right now. Some of you were cold outside, so you decided to put on a jacket. You decided right then, I'm cold, therefore I'll do X, Y, Z. I'd rather not stand, so I will grab a chair and sit. I don't want to stand up and sit down in normal spots. I want to sit behind a table. So you saw data here in the room, you pulled up a chair, and you got to work, and so forth. That's the adult ego state, here and now. Not from the past what you were taught, per se, but you're making decisions right now. The child ego state, behaviors, thoughts, and feelings, replayed from childhood. And we'll talk a lot more about those three areas. Whenever we communicate, anytime you and I communicate, we are communicating from one of these ego states. Now, again, I'm not to do 1,000 nuances because I know this is not a master level course or whatever, but someone say, well, it can be contaminated and you're kind of from one or the other. Just to keep it simple, let's just say from one of the ego states. Ideally, we determine which one we're coming from, but at any time, something or someone can trigger a shift from one state or the other. So when we communicate, we come from, and how we respond, receive what they said, we're taking it or giving it as one of these three areas. So for example, I'll do this over here. Well, picture PAC. You have these circles right here, PACs, right? Just remember that thing I put before that on the board when y'all were hearing boundaries? Or forget PAC. I'm talking to Scott here. As Scott would talk to me, I'm receiving that information from either a parent state, an adult state, or a child state. You are saying it from either a parent, adult, or child state. So when you say it, and as I'm receiving it, we're both in one of these ego states. Now, as soon as I receive it, I might talk back to you from a different ego state. I might receive it like a child, but then talk back to you like a parent. And then you might receive it as a parent, talk down as an adult. It might go, so the ego states can shift over and over and over and over as we do that. And I'm going to talk a lot about those transactions, those I talk, you listen, you talk, listen. He called those transactions, which is why we call it transactional analysis. It's communication. Before we do that, let's analyze these ego states. Okay, let's dig deeper. What do I mean by a child state? Let's look at the child. Bottom of one, child is the emotional state. Think of yourself in your emotional state. Fear, love, anger, joy, sadness, shame. When we are in the child ego state, we aren't just putting on an act. We really are being children. We see the world, in that moment, we're experiencing the world like a child does. Emotive. It's emotive. And he's got a lot of stuff here. The child is often blamed for being the source of people's troubles. It's self-centered, emotional, powerful, resists oppression. It doesn't want to grow up. The child is seen as the source of, NTA at least, the source of creativity, recreation, procreation. We're adults here. I do this in marriage counseling all the time when we use TA, when we get to that part of, if it's needed in the marriage counseling. You're supposed to have, now stay with me, when you have intercourse, when you have sex as a married couple, that's supposed to be in the child ego state. That is to say, it's a fun, happy time. And one of the number one problems I find in relationships with marriages is it's almost always this way. It's not always. But when the woman comes to the bedroom, per se, in the parent ego state, and he's in the child ego state, well, you don't want to have sex with your parent. That's both gross and emotionally it's gross. And that causes all kinds of problems because of this child ego state. It's supposed to be fun and carefree, safe, let's have you laugh, ha 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 ha. Going to the KU football game. I was there Saturday. People were going crazy and laughing and cheering. Oh, man, yay! Child ego state. How many thousands of people were there in a pure ego state of child, almost nonstop? They were mad at them when they messed up. They booed at the referee when they did something they didn't like. They cheered when they scored. That's child ego state. You go to Vegas, that's child ego state. Going to the movies, child ego state. You're at a party or a concert, child ego state. It's the part of you when you're excited or afraid. The child will appear for short periods of times in other situations like board meetings, classrooms, or serious discussions where it may not be desired at all. It's the time you start giggling for no reason or someone busts out a joke, hey, what'd you think about so-and-so? When it's a real serious moment. It's the child ego state that wants to let loose for a second because you feel the tension. See, the child state, we don't like the tension. We want to laugh about it. We want to get that tension out, so we tell jokes. And when you stay in that state all the time, it's undesirable. It's when it dominates a person's life. They can be severely emotionally disturbed, depressed, crazy, or addicted child will drive them to virtual self-destruction because, again, they just want constant thrill. They get addicted to the feeling of adrenaline or fear or sadness, and they're there all the time. Addicts stay in a child state almost all the time. Thrill seekers, adrenaline junkies, they're in a child ego state all the time. When you stay in an ego state for a predominant amount of time, in TA we call that a script. Just like a movie script. If Tom Cruise gets a script to be in a movie, what am I? I'm the villain. I'm the hero. And the heroes are supposed to do the right things. Or it's a weird hero where they're the bad, but you root for them. I mean, it's a mold. It's a script. It fits a certain thing. And when you stay in an ego state for a long time, it's a script. For example, you have at the very bottom, page 1, the child state. You have the natural child, the hating or loving, impulsive, spontaneous, playful. The script is the clown. There it is. The script is the clown. If you're always playful, telling jokes, you're impulsive, hey, let's skip work and go watch the movies right now. If that's you often, if you're always the jokester, you're the one in the room or the board meeting or at home who's always telling the jokes and always the life of the party, that script is called a clown. Because I'm friends with some clowns, and they know that. We've talked about it. And one guy in particular is my best guy friend who's the clown role for a long time, but he gets real upset when he's not being the clown. People, what's wrong? What's wrong? Like, nothing's wrong with me at all. Nothing. And it frustrates some people. What's wrong with you today? One is he's not performing. He's not making everybody laugh all the time. Well, part of it, and we've talked about, part of it's his fault because he is a funny guy and he does like making people laugh. But when he doesn't perform, we don't want clowns to walk around with the makeup on and to say, what's up? Give me some coffee. It's your time to dance. And so the clown is that one who's always performing, if they're predominant there. The intuitive child is thoughtful, creative, or imaginative. They're the artist, the musician. If you stay there all the time, we call that the little professor. It's what my son is almost all the time. Actually, Dad, did you know? Blah, 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 blah. They can be really great in the little professors. The problem with the little professors is they don't have enough data to make their intuition correct. That is, their data set, to use scientific terms, their data set is so limited, they don't make proper deductions. They might experience something one time and go, yep, the way the world works is, no, you haven't. And so adults, ideally, parents or whomever, like myself, are always saying, no, son, it's not true that people always do blank. That person did it, but there are a lot of people who also do X, Y, Z. But he's a little professor, intuitive, thinks him, yep, here's how it is. Now he gets that, bless his heart, from his daddy. And I told him one day that's going to serve you really well. When your data gets better and collect over lifetime experience and education, then your intuition is going to serve you very well. Because when you have a pattern of this, you'll be able to apply it better. But that's the little professor, the ones you see them in movies sometimes, the thick glasses, sir. And that's that kind of stuff. But also it's that creative. Now, I'm not making fun when I give these descriptions. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can be 80, 90, 100 years old and be in your little professor script. That is, it's that part where you're creative. But if you live there all the time, we call that a script. When you're not there all the time and Kathy's making her wind chimes and she's going, I bet I could get that, and that metal, and I could put that. Well, that's in your child ego state. Doesn't your heart race a little bit, get kind of excited when you start dreaming? Yeah, right. You dream, I could do this. And your heart races, get kind of anxious, but it's a happy anxious. Well, I do that too when I work on banners here at the church or a sermon. We could do this, and my heart's racing. Today, I live that every day. I have that thrill every day. I'm in my child state. Well, that's good. So it's not bad. It's just, what if I stay there all the time? That's the number one. We could do this. They're the ones that starving artist mindset. They're always just dreaming of the big unknown. And the adapted child is the one who's guilty or fearful or ashamed. And sometimes we call that script the frog because they feel so ashamed of who they are. I'm a nobody. See, a lot of people have that script in life. I'm nobody. I won't fit in. I'm a loser. I'm too ugly. I'll always be single. I'll always be woe is me. In TA terms, we'd call them the frog. They stay in an adaptive child state. If in a similar vein, if they feel the sense of guilt or want a sense of rebellion, we call that adaptive child as the black sheep. We use that vocabulary in the real world now, the black sheep of the family. Black sheep, there's a whole movie, it's a silly movie called Black Sheep with Chris Farley. But the black sheep is the person who deliberately feels outcast. I know many people, I've known several people though in my life who play the black sheep role very well. And they might be fully functioning adults in normal parts of life, but then they go back to the family reunion. Or then they go back to their church, and all of a sudden they're a black sheep. They might serve in the background and stay way in the corner and sit over here by themselves and just kind of, woe is me, I don't fit in. They're the ones that always have to be chased. They always have to have attention. They get chased because black sheep need a lot of attention that way. Because deep inside they're outcast. So whenever we feel fearful, guilty, or ashamed, we're in the adaptive child ego state. If we stay there, we're like the frog or the black sheep. Does that make sense? So the script is not what it is when you're there for a little bit. The script is when you're there for a long period of time, or you're predominant kind of area in life. Let me pause here about the child ego state, please. Yeah. Any question or comments?
Question.
Very good question. Very good question. So the child state, just to repeat it for the microphone, the child ego state doesn't mean they're immature. It does mean in the moment they're acting immature, because that's the definition. I mean, they're not grown up. By definition, they're child ego state. But that's not the same. That's not the same thing as what you're assuming, which is the character flaw of you have character deficiencies. You're immature in that sense. You need to grow up and live the life. And when that's a pattern, then it's a character deficiency, and living these scripts would be you're being immature. Like if I'm always the frog or black sheep or the clown, you could say that's a sense of you're being immature because you're staying in your child ego too long. When you're there for short periods of time, particularly when you want to be, that's not a sign of character deficiency. So my answer is, when you're in a script, I would say you're more prone to be called immature, and it would fit. If you're there just for moments of time, like I'm being creative to build my wind chimes, you're not being immature in that sense. You're just in your child ego state. Yeah, when I get excited about or write music or whatever, technically I'm acting immaturely because I'm so excited. I might get up and dance. I might sing. You might hear it on the hallway. When the website worked today and I screamed, I go, it's up, and I was screaming and singing and being silly, I'm acting immaturely, right? In the moment, I sure am, but that's on purpose. I'm celebrating, and I'm trying to give myself permission to celebrate. I've had to work years on that to give myself permission to be silly, but that's on purpose. So David, you're being immature. I'd say you're right. But if in general, David's character flaw, he needs to grow up because he's always, I would say, well, I don't think I'm that, unless you say I'm having a script. I'm staying there all the time, and like the Peter Pan, I don't want to grow up. I'm staying in that child ego state. That's immature. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm not trying to be equivocating on the term, but I think I get your point. So if someone says you're immature, yes, it's in a good way when it's for a season. Good question. What else? What else? You want to stay in your child state when you can. Go there. It's healthy. It's good. It's good. Some of you in this room, even a little bit I know about it, I know you stay in scripts and something else, and I'll get to you in a little bit. But you want to go there from time to time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Correct. So is it healthy to be in a script? A TA specialist will say, no, it's not healthy. That is, you won't get what you want out of life if you stick to a script. Scripts are when you might call it the extreme form of something. So scripts are not healthy. Scripts, healthy, mature adults do not stay in a script all the time. On they're a child, adult, or parent. That's a great question.
They're okay at the appropriate time.
Yes, ma'am. They're all okay and good and healthy at the appropriate time. Yes, ma'am. And that's why sometimes we get frustrated to say it was a very serious moment about maybe someone just heard bad news, someone died or something, someone's busting jokes. We're like, dadgummit, this isn't time for that. So even as society, at least in American cultures, have different cultural norms, there's social contract theory there, they would determine what's appropriate. When can that ego state come out? Now, some people go to the child ego state in those serious moments, again, because they don't know how to deal with that anxiety. So they go to the silly part. But outside of those times, but in general, we want to go there. It's good to be happy. It's good to be there. And I'm going to drop little points as I go along, just to make. I'm trying to make this as real world as I can to, because I'm telling you, you can see this not only in your lives, you can see it in groups of people. Denominations, I'm convinced denominations stay in scripts. Black cultures tend to stay in the script of child, particularly black churches. So they walk in the parking lot, they're already dancing and clapping. They're ready to go, they're ready to party, because worship time is party time. It's time to let loose. And so raising the hands, clapping, dancing, whatever, that's all child ego state. And they're going to say, I'm experiencing the presence of the Lord. How could you conceivably sit there with your hands in your daggum pockets looking like someone just died? What is wrong? That's exactly, I've heard many people say that. So they feel permission to be in a child ego state at worship time, at any other time. That's why they can laugh louder and do all kinds of stuff. White people tend to stay in the adult ego state all the time. It's serious. And that's a good old European puritanical, white, European descent. It's proper, very quiet and still. How could you possibly act like that? This is not the time. And so we all determine, and then on top of that, certain denominations and certain generations tend to be parental. We'll talk about them a little bit. But I noticed that in churches across denominations, and I won't pick on this church just yet. On another church I've been to, they were typical kind of a little more modern, mainstream Baptist church, and worship. Some people raised their hands. Some were a little expressive. Most were not. They had a traditional and modern service, like we do. And it was pretty normal. And then they had a guy come to lead worship and did a concert, Travis Cottrell, who I love. He's awesome. And I almost didn't go. I thought, oh, whatever. And Lane said, you ought to go. I think he's good. We have free tickets. And I'm so glad I went. That same congregation, there's like 80-90% of them, were on their feet going crazy. You thought a bunch of Pentecostals had taken over the church, raising their hand and swaying. And I remember that night I looked, but it was so good. It sounds cheesy, but sweet. It was a great night of worship. The lyrics, the songs, it was just such a good night of worship. It was good. And I told Lane, even during the meeting, and I said, I looked around and said, I was looking like, I know that person, that. And usually they're just hands in their pocket on Sundays. And I leaned over to Lane and I said, see, at a concert, they feel permission to do this. But on church, they don't. And that's sad to me. And I'm going to preach about worship in 2017, but I want to talk more about this. Yeah.
Is that just moving into your parental mode?
What's that?
When you said that's sad.
It's sad. No, that's for my child state. My child state, it really grieves me that other children won't play with me.
Oh.
Yeah.
When I spend
That's right.
holidays with my 4 kids and do those things. So.
Very good. Yeah, when you hang out with kids, you got to wear many hats, and that's right.
Figure, well, whatever, I'm going to go with it.
The adults thinking, okay, 350 degrees, 28 minutes, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'll go play that game. Right? And if you can't get out of that, you won't go play, or you won't cook. That's a good point. As we've had children, Christmas now means something radically different for me, not theologically, but the experience of opening presents. So let me be very clear. It's very different now as a parent. I get joy and happiness in my child ego state watching my children have a good time. And so I don't get near as excited about that comic book they got or whatever. And Daddy, don't you like it? No, but I like seeing you get happy. I'm in a child ego state. You're right. So sometimes we can just observe and get in the child ego state. So churches can do this, groups can do this, Bible study groups can do this. I'm convinced whole generations of people can do it, and it depends on what state they want to be in. It took me I'm always honest with you, I'm confessional with you. I'm still getting better at this, because it took me, so I grew up in more high church tradition and so forth, and you're real still, no one made a peep unless you're singing a hymn. It was just, you sat down. It's taken me a long time to get better at worship. And by that, and I'll talk a lot more about this later, but give myself permission not to think about myself all the time. What do I look like? How are my hands? What am I doing? Well, that's not worshiping anybody but me. I'm not the point. And so, well, what would they think about me? Well, see, I'm thinking of them. I'm not worshiping my neighbor. And so it's taken me a long time to let go of that and say, what if the Spirit did want to move? Have you ever read the Bible and how much they go free? Does that mean you're not worshiping if you're not dancing? Of course it doesn't mean that. I'm only saying one specific thing. The child ego state is difficult for a lot of people because they don't give themselves permission to do it. And that's because they have what's called a critical parent in their mind saying, don't do that, sit up straight, don't act up. I'm at a previous church, one place I was sitting behind during the service, and it's interesting when they didn't know who I was, because it was a large church, and so a lot of guests come rotating the sanctuary. And when I wasn't preaching, I sit sometimes in the back just to observe people and get to know people. And hello, I'm Dave and so forth. But I remember when you see it all the time. But I remember sitting behind this new family. They're all lined up, and you could tell they were kind of new to church. The kids really didn't know what to do. But they were dressed up, and one was kind of leaned over, and the dad would go, hey, he'd elbow him, sit up straight. And he sit up straight, and the other kid was kind of playing, hey. But of course, the point is be on your best behavior. That's what you do in church. I was thinking, I laughed about it, I smiled about it in a cute way. I was thinking, bless these kids' heart, I'd have the same, issue when I had. But I was also thinking, they're children. Let them lean over. Let them draw on something. They're kids. What are children going to do? They're going to be in their child ego state. But see, what happens is when we don't feel permission, we expect others to raise it, and it carries on and carries on. And, well, we can go in there if you want any question or comments, but it's good to be in your child state. It's good to give yourself permission to do that. It's good to play. It's good to laugh. It's good to have fun. It's just good and healthy. It's just good to have. One of my favorite pictures of a so-called portrait of Jesus is when he's laughing. If you look on Google, you can see it. He's got his head cocked back and he's just laughing. We don't always picture that way, Jesus. It's very somber, serious, blood-stained, whatever. Praise Jesus, he died for me. But Jesus also laughed. He would tell jokes. He told silly parables. When you judge people, it's like you got a big fat 2x4. Can you see this, Peter? Can you see this? Oh, let me get that speck for you. That's funny. You look like a moron with a big fat 2x4. It's funny. Hey, I got a speck. Here you go, Scott. It's a funny hyperbole. These are funny things he does. And there's no telling the stuff. I wish we had more of that sense of humor in the Gospels, but not that he was a clown, but he wasn't, it depends on which movie you watch. Hello, blessed are. Everything is serious. Yeah, give yourself permission can help you not explode. That's what that desire you have to go to vacation, that's your child bursting out for attention. I got to get away. I'm living for the weekend. I got to go to Florida. I got to go to the beach. I got to whatever. That's the child ego state that wants so badly to get out from under the pressure. And when you suppress a child all the time, it can lead to all kinds of bad behavior like exploding, like affairs, like addictions, like whatever, because you have this condemnatory voice, we're talking about the critical parent, and finally you let loose. Midlife crisis is when the child couldn't come out to play.
Or a nice quiet ulcer.
A nice quiet ulcer. That's right. That's right. Nice quiet heart attacks.
When people drink a lot
They
of
drink.
alcohol.
Oh yeah. The number one reason in my life, I've never drank alcohol, but I've been around a lot of people who do, and I ask them times. Just I'm really interested in it. But the number one reason I meet with people who drink often or wine every night or every Friday or after every time they come home, they'll say it's to what? To unwind, take the edge off. Well, that means they're medicating. And guess what happens? I've been around a lot of people who are drunk or been drinking or whatever, and it's amazing how they're just let loose. They're funner. They might be funny before they get real drunk, but that buzz, they're they're kind of fun. Well, hey, I always go, man, they're kind of fun when they're not with their normal selves, but they think that too about themselves. Well, to which I would say, you could keep doing this the rest of your life, getting drunk to get the child, or you could just go to therapy and allow to activate your child ego state and have fun without being drunk. It's possible to do that. It's possible to have fun without drinking anything. Not that that's sinful to drink it. Jesus drank some wine. But those who do it to self-medicate, I got to get the edge off. It's the only way I can go on a date. It's the only way me and my wife can enjoy the night. I've got to get some liquor in me. That's unfortunate. They're not allowing that child ego state to come out. They're not allowed to come out. Yes, sir.
Well, and there is a theory on that same line of thinking is that.
Yeah. That's right. So to repeat that, if you have a compulsive desire to drink even a little bit all the time or every day, there's an emotional, psychological issue going on. Absolutely right. Absolutely.
Great series on that. I think it should.
The volume's not the key to determine if you have a problem. They can have worse consequences if you have a greater volume. There can be a problem.
Unwind or something bad
That's right.
happens if you didn't have that.
That's right. If you can't unwind, absolutely. When literal children grow up, remember I alluded to this a couple weeks ago, but just to remind us, and for some it's new, as literal children grow up, I'm trying to remind you, we, as children, grow up to teenage years, we're supposed to be able to have the self-control to move from a child ego state toward an adult ego state more often. And when they do not develop that, they grow up and they're very stunted, they're very immature. They're not able to get out and they stay in the script. And then, of course, they might take a different dynamic we call the Peter Pan syndrome, where they can't grow up. They end up becoming adult children, can't leave home, can't pay their own bills, because they just stay constantly in a child ego state. So when they mature, we as human beings are supposed to develop to these stages, and we're able to regulate it. So we're able to allow ourselves in the child ego state, and we're able to let it come to a close. It's not always time to let loose and skip work. Sometimes we have responsibilities. And if they can't get out of the script, I don't like those. They go from job to job to job to job, thrill to thrill to thrill to thrill. This one doesn't really do it for me. And that's sad and unfortunate and unhealthy and immature. And so part of our job as parents and grandparents sometimes, if we have our children a lot, is to help them get that ego state up. So we don't want to force it upon them too much, but that teenage years we slowly give more responsibility if they realize what adults do.
How do you leave Lost Boys Island?
How do you leave Lost Boys Island? That's right. We do this study with them. That's how we do it. I encourage you to think about this for your own life right now if you haven't already. What are some ways you could do better activating your child ego state? What are some ways you can do better? Here's another question. Have you given yourself real permission to be in your child ego state every day, at some point, every day? If not, I encourage you to do it. I encourage you to think about, I want to do this every day. I want to laugh some. Every day, I want to sing some, dance some, do something that looks silly or acts silly or is fun. Something that makes you fun, something that makes your heart race, like creating stuff, a lot of artist stuff. That's being in a child state. What are you doing every day? Look at my daughter back. She's drawing right now like a child. And what are you doing for that child to be fostered? A lot of people grew up in homes, literal houses, where the parents did not allow you to do that. And we call it parentifying a child. It's when we force a literal child to be grown up too fast, especially when parents were addicts or divorced, and they go lean upon their child for counseling and they got to make their own meals, clean their own bed, and they never really fostered what it meant to be a child when you were a child. And they grow up and never learned it. Because the parents said, sit up straight, don't say that, it's always you. No. They were never allowed to be children, and they're stunted. If that were you, it means your child is never really seen much of the light of day. And I encourage you, really, what can you do to play? I play video games. Sometimes I act at my child state. I used to do that on Xbox, and I was doing computer. I go to the movies. I sing a lot. I play with kids, help a lot too. I try to be silly with them. Silly faces, silly time, dancing. I try my best, but that's on purpose. That's not, okay, today I must be a child. How do I do that? Okay, now it's time to dance. No, it's not forced. It just means I give myself permission in moments to be silly. So I encourage you. God says that's okay. He designed that. If not, anything else will go into adult. I hope you'll keep thinking about that. I want you to be in your child state some. I had some ideas for us tonight that we could act out being children, but I'm afraid some of you go crazy. Yeah, that's right. I was going to have you all do the YMCA together, but okay. Tom looked kind of nervous by that. I'll move on. I'm just messing. Let's do the adult ego state. That's right. I went backwards. The adult is the human computer. Now, in Star Trek, I've said think Spock or Data. If that doesn't relate to you, think of a robot or computer. But that's it. Data in, data out. The adult computes all the facts. If the facts are up to date, the adult's answers will be timely and superior to the parent solution. If the facts are incorrect, the adult computer will produce incorrect answers. The adult has no emotions. It's about data. So in order to be logical, we need to be able to separate ourselves from our emotions. And it doesn't mean that to be logical is the best at all times. It just means that's what it is. You're in your adult ego state when you're problem solving, when you're taking in data, like you're doing, some of you right now are taking in this data and you're computing it, you're trying to process it. If you're listening, you're in your adult ego state when you do that. Sometimes the adult uses information, here's important, which has its source, the data, comes from the child or parent. That's called contamination. So you think it's data from the real world moment, but it's not. You're actually drawing upon something you learned from childhood, from your child has been memorizing, or your parent state memorized. So here it is. When a contamination comes from the parent, it's called a prejudice. For example, being racist. I know of some executives who actually thought Asians didn't make good executives, so they were never promoted. Contamination occurs when we accept it as a fact without checking against reality. So again, a parental figure taught them that. It went in their database as data. Then they meet an Asian and go, you can't be an executive. You're not, or you're this, you're white, you're black, you've got blonde hair, you must be blank. You think it's based on present data, but it's not. It's from a parent who taught you that. Don't trust them people. I tell you what, all Mexicans these days, I tell you what, whatever it is, whatever. I grew up in Mississippi. Thank God my parents weren't racist, but I was around a lot of it. And so if I thought that was in my data and I'm making present day decisions, that's contamination. When contamination comes from the child, it's called a delusion. And it's usually based on a child fear or hope. For example, because you were scared of your mom's anger when you had your own opinion, which differed from hers, you assume as an adult that people will be angry at you when you differ from them. That's for me, by the way. All kinds of delusions coming. So whatever you learned as a child, that's based off fear or hope. If you're a kid and you had afraid because you're very poor, and you learn because of that fear not to give your money blank, or don't do this, or my dad worked all of his years and ended up for a dead end and that but blank. My parents got divorced and it caused terror, therefore marriage is not for me and doesn't work for anybody. See, your childhood experience of fear comes part of your quote-unquote data, but it's wrong. It's a delusion. But in this present life, we'll make decisions based on childhood or parenting. Does that make sense, what we're talking about? So can you think of the prejudices or delusions you have?